All right, welcome everyone to this talk on what we can learn from Indigenous people that will be offered by Yin Paradies. And before I hand it over to Yin, I wanted to offer a couple just general logistical details. The format of this talk is going to be probably about a 40-minute talk offered by Yin, followed by another 40-ish minutes of question and answer time. Throughout the whole thing, my request is that everybody keep themselves muted so that we can reduce background noise, ideally eliminate background noise, and we don't have trouble with echoes or anything like that. So I will watch the participant screen, and if anyone unmutes themselves, I will mute you right back again. But I think that's probably it as far as logistics. I guess another thing I will acknowledge that this is being recorded. It's not going to be made public on YouTube, but it will be unlisted. So when we come to the Q&A session, if you don't want to see your image or your name show up on the recording, then probably the best thing to do would be to post a question in the chat, and I will try to read the questions from the chat that show up. The recording will not be on YouTube as an unlisted video indefinitely. With Quillwood events, I typically will remove the recordings after about 30 days. So I'll just give that little bit out. Quick bio, Yin Paradies is Alfred Deakin Professor and Chair in Race Relations at Deakin University. And Yin, if I mispronounce that, please feel free to correct me. In Victoria, Australia, he is a Wakaya Aboriginal man known for his research on the health and societal effects of racism, as well as work applying anti-racism principles in a wide variety of settings. He also teaches and undertakes research in indigenous knowledges and decolonization. So with that, I'm going to unpin myself, and I'm going to give the floor to Yin. And yeah, let me know if you need anything logistic-wise.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming along. I'm outside, looking over the mountains where I live in the Yarra Valley, east of Melbourne in Australia. There might be a small amount of background noise. There are some people about. They're not very close by, but let me know if that's an issue. I've got some slides. I should, as Eric said, only need about 40 minutes or so for the slides, and feel free to also interrupt during the slides and ask questions. Sometimes we don't even get through all the slides, but that's okay because I can send them through to you via Eric afterwards, and the discussion's really is important part of this session for me anyway. So I won't be able to see your hands or anything, but just interrupt if you want to ask something during, and we should have plenty of time for discussion after as well. So how did humans live before modern societies is the topic, the question of this session. I'll start by what we do here is acknowledgement of country, acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as traditional custodians of the unceded land where I live, play, work, etc., and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and future, other Indigenous people on the call, and also to Bunjil, the great ancestor creator of the Kulin Nation around here, who can be seen sometimes flying through the sky. He's a wedge-tailed eagle, Bunjil. He and she are wedge-tailed eagles. So we start with a kind of brief overview of what I mean by modern societies, or modernity. It's another way to put it. There's lots of ways of defining, describing, engaging with that topic. My way is to go back a ways. So we know that now that modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, anatomically modern humans, are at least 330,000 years old as a species, which is, very young for mammals. You know, a lot of mammals are much older than that. A horse, for example, is 70 million years old. So we're a young species, but nonetheless, that's quite a bit longer than what was recently considered the age of humans. And the evidence that I'm drawing from suggests that humans lived very differently for most of that time to how we live now. Yes, we're talking about technology, but we're talking about much more than that. We're talking about the nature of societies, the state of consciousness that we flow through life in, etc. Talk more about that. About 10,000 years ago, 11,000 years ago, a lot of interesting things started to happen that have shaped, I would say, how we live life now. We could talk more about those as we go. It's things like constitutive violence, static hierarchy, command control structures, monotheism, wars of invasion and conquest, prisons, toil, slavery, debt, literacy. A lot of things happened that before that, as far as we know, really weren't around or were around in very, very different forms. Evidence for that is from the genetic record, changes in procreation, changes in housing in very, very early cities, small cities or towns, what we would call towns. Rise of private property in burials and so forth. Nutrition, changes in nutrition and dental health. So there's a lot of evidence of kind of really quite cataclysmic changes that started in particular parts of the world. Mesopotamia would be one of them, but also in other parts of the world to a lesser degree at about that time. So I'm talking about modernity as arising, the origins of modernity as arising during that time period of history, obviously before what we call written history. And then we fast forward a very long time to about 500 years ago, and this is a map of every country that Britain has invaded, not the ones in white. So this is what we would call the pointy end of modernity, where we talk of colonization as a concept that's happened in the last 500 years. Obviously not just Britain, but other European countries were involved in colonization, pretty much of the whole world, more or less. Even countries that weren't officially colonized were very heavily affected by the economic systems of Eurocentric cultures and so forth. So colonization started out fairly slowly in Mesopotamia and mostly in Mesopotamia and has moved on to be a global phenomenon. Modernity, colonization, patriarchal, capitalist sort of cultures. There are a lot of overlap between these things. The invention of money was a big part of the story. The rise of patriarchal cultures, which we live in now, was a big part of the story. We can talk more about that later. So this is what I'm talking about by modern societies, the ones we live in now and the ones that have really taken over the world. In the last 500 years, we've seen a lot of increase in private property through violent enclosures in Europe, and of course, colonization of indigenous lands across the globe, crushing of proto-feminism or really matriarchal kind of traditions by witch hunts, a very big change from oral cultures to written cultures, and of course, the rise of capitalism, industrialization, privatized profit, and generally what we talk of as constitutive violence embedded in monstrous protection rackets of paternalistic care. So we're talking about cultures that are really underpinned by a lot of coercion and conformity, a lot of bureaucracy in recent centuries, and a very particular form of politics that's at least meant to be a sort of representative democracy, is meant to be sort of the pinnacle of politics. Obviously, that's not achieved in many parts of the world, but the whole system is very much underpinned by corruption and nepotism anyway, wherever you are. And it's generally a politics about contest, persuasion, and spectacle. Yeah, politicians getting up to all sorts of troublesome behavior is kind of the norm, and great for media coverage as well. So what of the norms? What are the kind of core cultural aspects of colonial modernity, modern cultures, modern societies? There's a few. Here are some main ones. It's a sense of separatism between mind, body, and emotions. Very much an idea of separate individual things moving around, bumping into each other, and so forth. And that's what that sort of sidelines on the other side of the table are things like the spiritual, the mystical, the sacred, the divine, instinctive, holy, are not really engaged with much in our society. We have a particular view of time as kind of linear, as a resource, essentially, which is an unusual way to think of time for many human cultures through history. A sense of self-improvement or responsibility, which is quite divorced from the social context. Usually quite a strong sense of right and wrong, of what's correct and incorrect, what's sort of better and worse, which also is a little unusual for human cultures. And for a lot of hierarchy. Yeah, very hierarchical cultures. Competition is part of that story as well, but it's not really central for a lot of history of modern societies. Competition is a fairly new, I would say, sort of an add-on. It's not fundamental to capitalism, competition, which is more about monopoly, really. But hierarchy is definitely a big deal in modern societies. A lot of it around. Emphasized a bit less, perhaps, these days, explicitly, but still there. And comes in with ideas of merit and worthiness and so forth. And we've added a lot of competition to that as well. So there can be some movement within the hierarchy to some extent, some social mobility, but quite limited. Talked about a lot, but quite limited. And of course, where have we found ourselves in modern societies these days is an interesting question. There's still a strong view that among many people that we live in a society that's the best it's ever been. In other words, this is the best that humans have had it, really, and it just keeps getting better. That's kind of the image in the middle of this infographic. It's a sort of everything is awesome idea. People have modern technology and so forth. Democracy, as I mentioned, representative democracy, human rights, modern medicine. We live longer. These are all very much open to debate when you look deeply at the evidence, but some of it is obviously true, that people have washing machines and they didn't have the washing machines before, mobile phones, etc. And then on the outside, we see some of the issues that we face. Some people call it meta crises, fixed mass, global extinction, climate derangement, whatever you want to call it. There's some problems. And these problems are not kind of incidental or coincidental to the nature of modern societies. They're a consequence of the way we live and the way we have interacted and related with the global ecosystem, and it's just the consequence, really, of how we've done things. So maladies of modernity, more on, I guess you could say, the cultural norms of modernity. I call them maladies because, it may not surprise you to know that I have some issues with modernity and the way things have unfolded. I think there's better ways to live, and that's why we're talking about that sort of stuff in this session. So abstraction, alphabetization, anonymity, these are big parts of modernity. I won't explain why, but we can discuss and delve into some of this. Comfort, continuity, defensiveness, determinism, force, instrumentalization of people as well as places, life forms of various sorts. Intoxication, as in, well, one of the main features of modernity is a strong sense of addiction and craving that's cultivated by many aspects of our life. But also there's a lot of toxicity around in the world these days. Physical, chemical stuff I'm talking about. Modularity of life, objectivity, paternalism, we talked about perfectionism, power over or hierarchical forms of social organization, quantification, a lot of measurement, rationalization, reductionism, scheduling, Added that one in recently because I noticed that people do a lot of scheduling in modern societies, me included. Standardization, systemization, urgency, valuation, and weaponization. So lots of stuff we can talk about. Manacles of modernity. Separation is a huge one. The idea that we are separate individual, sort of sealed off selves, and that separates us from interdependence and vulnerability with life. Notions of unrestricted autonomy that come into kind of unrestricted growth, which is our economic system. Entitlement, merit, innocence, which denies complicity in harm, violence, and exploitation. Unceasing growth, mentioned already. Progress, the idea that things are always getting better, faster, bigger, stronger, whatever. Accumulation, acquisition, consumption, and waste, which really denies the finite biosphere that we live within and really are just an extension of. Certainty, surety, mastery, and control that offer simplistic solutions to complex predicaments that we find ourselves in at this juncture. Malaises of modernity: artificial scarcity, demand, profit, accumulation, hierarchy, individualism, exploitation, competition. There's some repetition in these slides, very much on purpose. Commodification of person, time, places, resources, comparison, judgment, condemnation, alienation. And lots of emotional or feelings that are totally fine in balance, but are very much out of balance in modernity. Cynicism, craving, fear, anxiety, blame, guilt, shame, greed, stress, disgust, horror, anger, frustration, boredom, desperation, stimulation, satisfaction. A lot of moral outrage too, I'd say, has come in these days. Control, conformity, coercion, compliance, cruelty. Purity, protagonism, progress, protest, popularity. There's a lot of these things that weave their way through our lives these days. This is a very busy kind of infographic. We won't sort of dissect the whole thing, but essentially we live on a planet and we have a system that's about nation states, universal reason, global capital, separability, and that house that modernity built exceeds the limits of the planet. We already have. We've already exceeded those limits. And there's a lot of costs to the system in terms of exploitation and violence and destitution, dispossession, genocide, and so forth. There's different flaws to the system. In other words, people have different levels of privilege and power and benefit. What to do about it, really, that's the top line of that or row of that infographic. Fix the house, build another house, etc., etc. And then beneath it is kind of like what underpins, back to some of those cultural norms of modernity, what underpins all of this, different forms of reasoning. This is a pretty good, I really like these ones. I think, therefore I am. I say, therefore it is. I own, therefore I rule. I lead, therefore you follow. I arbitrate, therefore you comply. I rock, therefore you suck. Very much good riffs on the Cartesian one at the top. And it mentions here, once again, I've talked about this briefly, but a kind of sidelining of the erotic, the aesthetic, the intuitive, the divine, the hilarious, the other than human, being reduced to knowing and meaning. Even meaning itself is limited. It's about fears, it's about scarcity, it's about compensatory desires, or what I call misplaced longings, which come into that business of addiction and craving. Very, very neurophysiological. Some of the scholars in this work talk a lot about the neurophysiology of modernity, how we are in these cycles of oxytocins or endorphins and so forth. So yes, sustaining colonial addictions, trapping human life force within the house, harnessing our fears and insecurities, property, perceived entitlements, need for stability and certainty, mastery, authority, validation, all these sorts of things. These are central features of modern societies. And we're going to talk about what other societies existed and still exist in parts of small, very small parts of the world. So what else is there? You know, if this isn't all there is, or all there could be, beyond TINA, TINA is an acronym, there is no alternative. Beyond that, What is it that humans have been doing and still do in very small pockets of the world, and perhaps will do in the future? So we're talking here about primal life, or let's say indigenous peoples, how indigenous peoples lived and do still live in some ways. I talk about that as primal sometimes, just because I don't really want to get caught up in identity politics. I'm talking about archaeological and anthropological kind of evidence for life that was outside modern societies. So obviously these are about clean air, soil, water, healthy food, none of which we really have anymore. Lifelong learning, mastery of skills, having people you love and who love you, still some of that going on, but not much. Either of those things. Belonging in a community where you're cherished, hard to find these days. Being able to contribute directly to your own needs, virtually impossible in modernity, where our needs are supplied by distant places and distant people, usually toiling away in difficult conditions. Kinship, relationality, contribution, egalitarianism, sacredness, predictability. These are parts of primal life as well. So I talk about predictability rather than control. Mostly, I mean, there's a balance for all these things, but mostly primal societies were more about predicting what the weather was going to do than, say, trying to control the weather, which we do try and do to a small degree, and a lot of other things that we try to control in our environment. So achievements of primal societies: vivid, varied, playful, meaningful, very, very healthy, well-nourished, virtually disease-free, long lives, socially, sexually egalitarian lives. A lot of diseases actually arose that we deal with now arose during the agricultural revolution and the density of living that came from cities. There's a lot of talk of high infant mortality and very short lifespans for pre-modern peoples, but when you dig a bit deeper, it's not really a lot of evidence for that. And 70 years, of course, is not quite as long as people tend to live now. So there's that. But also, how healthy are our lives now is another question. So thrived without invasion, laws, money, work, leisure, private property, police, institutional authorities, etc. Some interesting archaeological evidence that ancient peoples were as strong as elite rowers. So that's actually women. Ancient primal women were found, through bone density and so forth, were found to be as strong as elite rowers. These are average people in that time. Some also evidence from fossilized footprints and so forth. That men were as fast as Olympic sprinters, and there was a lot of impressive physical dexterity and sensory acuity in general. People were at ease with pain and discomfort, able to craft and improvise with miraculous skill, sensitivity, and presence, as far as we can tell. We don't know as much as we'd like to. So primal perspectives that kind of underpin these kind of pre-modern or existing outside of modernity societies are things like this, and see if you can feel into the difference between some of the stuff we talked about before. Nothing is complete, perfect, or enduring, but all is alive, sentient, profoundly relational, and deeply sacred. We are immersed in manifold scales or realms, which we can learn to perceive, inhabit, commingle, and grow with. We are invited to outgrow the often unquestioned obligation to obey, conform, judge, and repress, which stunts our ability to express, create, connect, and play. We are called to conscious, embodied, loving, reverent co-liberation with each other within the spontaneous, emergent, complex, self-organizing living cosmos. So these are quite different from some of the norms of modernity that we discussed before. Primal perspectives, different sort of approach to time, and more of an embracing of contradictory ways of and both kind of thinking. Lots of wisdom, humility, respect, reason, emotion, intuition, instinct, and imagination all kind of mixed together, and communication with the cosmos. Everything's alive, all's alive, so we can communicate, have relationships, be in kinship with all that is. Different approaches to time, which ironically we don't have time to talk about because we're running out of that stuff in our linear time schedules. Different forms of societal ways of doing things. One of these is about primordial freedoms of movement and hospitality. Not a lot of people being ordered about in primal societies, basically nobody. We do that a lot of oughts and shoulds these days. Some variations in social configuration through the year in terms of where people lived, how they organized for hunting or conflict and so forth. Lots of ideas of kinship and memory embedded within oral traditions. Radical localization, of course, no long supply chains, and no ideas of no institutions or nation states or centralization, really. Primal peoples are very much into what almost entirely, I mean, there's a lot of variation, but these are core elements of society as per the core elements of modern society that we talked about earlier. Fierce egalitarianism is a big one. So a lot of focus on autonomy among interdependent beings, free to choose and act while remaining immersed in deep connection and with consequences in kinship for, your behavior, but are very, very much about autonomy, what's called relational autonomy. So primal peoples were and are very individualistic, actually more individualistic than modern societies. Talk a lot about individualism as a philosophy or ideology, but the reality is that modern societies are very conformist, whereas primal societies were actually had a lot more eccentricity and uniqueness and accepted, welcomed forms of variety in the way humans showed up to the world. So we call that relational autonomy. At the same time, there was a lot of work to keep egos in check, so people didn't get too egocentric, a big problem in modern societies. There's ways where that worked. Some of those ways were teasing and banter and mockery and so forth, mostly in good faith and in good humor, almost all the time. Yeah, but others more extreme forms when required. So guidelines existed, of course. All societies have their own norms, and but they weren't really so much rules as guidelines. There's quite a big difference the way those show up in primal societies. And there was lots of ways that people were invited to consider the well-being of others, human and non-human. So other key aspects of primal societies, eccentricity I mentioned, individuality, not individualism, a lot of context sensitivity, no inherently oppressive abstracted rules, interdependence rather than independence or dependence, a lot of layered, nested forms of distributed authority and leadership. Oral cultures, very strong oral cultures that kept stories alive for tens of thousands of years, stories of, say, volcanoes exploding or flooding of straits and so forth. And also, we could talk about this for a long time, but a balance, a blurring between the literal, the metaphorical, the linear, spiral forms of time, being, becoming, place, time, etc. Another thing that really was important in primal societies is a prefigurative politics where the ends never justifies the means. People do things a lot, that they don't really sort of come up with ideas and then implement them. Ideas really come from what people do rather than the other way around. So there's a lot of connecting and interacting with the world, a lot of tactile, embodied living, and that very much that sense that what you do is important, and the process by which it happens is much more important than the ends. Of course, indigenous or primal societies had a lot of rituals and ceremonies, much more than we have now, and much more communal, not a routine, but a kind of creative repetition, connecting, of course, with the spiritual and the sacred and the holy as in doing that, but also connecting with themselves more deeply. A lot of befriending of death or practicing of little deaths through some of these ceremonies and rituals, which can be rites of passage, initiations, physical exertion, ingestion of entheogens, forms of psychedelics and so forth, fasting, pain, discomfort. Well, sometimes it's called revelatory austerity, to create different and to foster different states of consciousness. Once again, something that we don't do much of in modernity. Lots of making kin with life happened. Very complex kinship classificatory kinship systems, totems, skin names, moieties, complexity, lots of complexity in relating, because relating was really important and is really important in primal cultures. Different approach to knowledge as a kind of always emerging, very contextualized, very embodied type of thing, all about stories. Facts as badly told stories which lack embedded context would be pretty much how most primal cultures consider facts to be. And learning, remembering through singing and dancing and song and music, painting, carving, weaving games. Knowledge was sort of embedded in those rather than sort of, for us, it's a lot of entertainment. All those things are entertainment. They don't embed the knowledge of our culture so much, even though they're part of it. With oral traditions, the knowledge is kind of distributed through those mechanisms or practices. So knowledge as intimacy with the universe, really, the cosmos. So metaphorical, imminent, enacted reality, attending to patterns very, very closely, very deeply, and a lot of communication as with the cosmos, as learning, asking, talking to plants, talking to animals, listening to mountains, these sort of things, very common in primal societies. Basically universal. Animism was basically universal for primal societies. The idea that all is alive. Deep listening, we could talk about more of that, but we don't have time. So let's come back to that if we need to. Different principles of operating to modern societies. Lots about circles, not lines, empowerment, dialogue, less hierarchy, deep listening, humble learning, doing things with people. So not representative, as I said, representative politics is the whole idea of representation is very strange for primal peoples. They did stuff with each other, they connected, they collaborated, they moved at the speed of trust, and they still do where those cultures exist. Lots of focus on lived experience and the margins in the sense of that eccentricity, that uniqueness was very common and welcome. So we could characterize primal or indigenous societies as being about sacralized, embodied, constitutive, interdependent, autonomous, communal, collaborative, egalitarian, sustainable, self-possessed relationality with long-term mutualized authority. There's a lot there. Modern societies are more secular, self-preoccupied rather than possessed, competitive, independent or dependent, which kind of go together in a way, hierarchical, oppressive, coercive, conformist, exploitative, accumulative relationships with short-term sanctified authority. Once again, lots there to discuss. We could get into different H's or not with the 4 whatevers or the 7 whatevers. There's a lot of those in the next few slides. Things like humility, radical honesty, listening to yourself. Sense of humor was very big in primal societies and still is. People laughed a lot more than we do. Cried a lot more too. Emotions were more central, I guess, rather than a kind of logical, linear, rational sense of self. The 7 Ds of primality, just to bring in some more letter type, number letter combos. Declutter your being, detoxify your practices, decommission your weapons, disarm your refusals, rejections, and resistances. Desist from both demonization and idealization, that sort of swinging back and forth of the pendulum is very big in modern societies. Decenter your indulgences and misplaced longings. De-invest in addictions, cravings, and compulsions. From 10 C's to 10 A's is again getting a bit much now with the numbers. So carrying, coping, containing, compensating, curing, clearing, correcting, conquering, coercing, controlling. A lot of stuff we talked about that characterizes modern societies. You could go from that to attending, accepting, allowing, acknowledging, attuning. Attunement is a really big one for primality. Atoning, awakening, amplifying, activating, actualizing. Yeah. So primality is about heart and gut-based rather than head-based experiences, a kind of intertwined psychic existence scape rather than a narcissistic, ego-based world. So connecting with, dwelling with the spiritual, beyond the anxiety-ridden, if-then, infinite flowcharting of mere living, which a lot of people do in modernity. It's about moving through portals of transformation and growth, and it's about getting beyond thought, thinking. Life is about more than thinking. There's a lot of feeling involved, intuition, instinct, these sort of things. Where do they come into life, reality? Primal tips: from form to flow, from saving to shedding, from knowing to noticing. It's a big one. From rights to responsibilities, from go-getting to grief tending, from entitlements to entanglements, from what we are owed to our own obligations. Obligations are a very important part of primal life, pre-modern, ex-modern life. Obligations that we are called to, we're not berated about them. We're not told off about them constantly, but we certainly feel a sense of love and kinship and connection and care for a lot of different life forms, and we have the obligations that flow from those. Other primal tips: from rushing to slowing down, and therefore being able to perceive otherwise, from doing the right things to letting things happen the right way. Doing the right things has that sense of ending, of outcome. We're getting back to that prefigurative politics of process. From seriousness to lightheartedness, from heaviness to lightness of being, from creating anew and reinventing the wheel to noticing existing wisdom, knowledge, and innovation. From needing everyone in the room and on the same page to repairing and renewing existing relationships without the need for agreement or conformity. Some interesting questions, getting to the last few slides. What if we stop trying to solve global problems by scaling up standardized solutions? What would it mean to accept ourselves unconditionally, just as we are, while staying wide open to growth? How can we invite material conditions and social relations which are conducive to life, beauty, and thriving? How can we live with dignity, love, courage, and truth while opening our hearts to those whose views and actions we profoundly object to? Can we enjoy life's resonances, vibrations, textures, thrummings, roilings, secretions, and emanations as we deepen our vulnerabilities to the suffering of and in the world? What if we tapped into the immense joy of forgetting who and what we think we are, and instead sensed the gift of not only being what we imagine ourselves to be? What if within sinuous structures we are the best version of ourselves, in synchronous, resonant, ritual, pulsing cosmic kinship, where vital, rapturous experiences anchored in harmonic pattern vibrations? What if we experienced the ground, the sky, and the waters as animate, sentient, responsive, scintillating with the sacred shimmer and hopping with the holy hum of life? How would that feel through most of the day, most of the week? Recovering from modernity may be about coming to the realization that knowledge and spirit of country can restore us to sanity. Country being land and waters and sky. Make a decision to turn our lives over to the custodianship of country. Make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves, and admit to the ancestors, to ourselves, and to another human, probably a few of them, our wrongs. Through conscious relating, humbly and repeatedly ask ancestors, country and spirit only for healing and knowledge of the pattern of creation and the practices to increase relatedness and complexity within that pattern. This is an invitation to societies that value self-realization, needs, freedom, interdependence, care, love, connection, celebration, beauty, grief, cooperation, without institutionalized exploitative hierarchies, hoarding resources produced by the labor of others. What would happen if we wove tapestries of empowered local cooperative communities grounded in anarchy as a political philosophy, degrowth, wilding, unschooling, permaculture, decolonization, myth, ritual, ceremony, that inspire authentic, creative, thriving, playful, vivid, plural, messy, mystical, vulnerable, sacred, sensuous, joyful, senseful lives? The challenge here that we're invited to to stay with our appetites, thoughts, feelings, emotions, moods, desires, sensations, yearnings, longings, yieldings, repulsions, callings, instincts, hunches, inklings, and needs. Stay with the trouble. Offer ourselves in full to the world as it is, without demanding acceptance, welcoming change, transformation, metamorphosis, catharsis, intensity, and rupture, while attending to our limits within any given time and place. Can we meet others with more curiosity, courage, vulnerability, love, honesty, and humility? Sense visceral needs behind actions, learn and grow with gratitude, connection, and conviviality, while minimizing correction, coercion, etc. Attend to beauty, wonder, and grace, especially in dire and deeply violated situations. It's simple but hard. Can we slow, pause, rest, sleep, idle, lull, shed, catalyze, channel, doula, delve, guide, receive the unknowable, unexpected, uncomfortable, uncertain, unthinkable, and imperceptible? Make unique mistakes in doing what is needed with maturity, sobriety, and discernment, beyond consumption, comfort, convenience, choice, conviction, or complaint. Metabolize, integrate assumptions, aversions, addictions, vices, disguises, habits, triggers, complicities, projections, urges, traumas, idealizations, and ossified dichotomies. Discern, perceive, relate, communicate, become without judgment, comparison, justification, condemnation, narrative, meaning, interpretation, or intellectualization. The end. But not the end of the session. Now it's time for questions and discussion.
And I'll pin myself just for a moment. For the question and answer section of this, if folks want to use the raise hand feature in Zoom, you can do that, I believe, by pushing the reactions button on the bottom and then clicking raise hand. So if you have a question that you would like to ask, that would be one way of making sure that Yin or I sees you. The other possibility is that you could physically raise your hand. And if you happen to be along my top row here, I'll see you. And if you do that and you don't get the response that you would like, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, of course, without just talking over someone else, if at all possible. I do have a couple of questions that we could start with, but I certainly want to make space for other people. So if there's anyone out there who has a question and would like to get us rolling, raise your hand or let me know in the chat and I'll give you the space. I'm going to unpin myself. Kenneth, we'll start with you. You'll need to unmute yourself, by the way.
Okay, sorry. Yes, could your speaker elaborate more on spiral forms of time?
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of indigenous languages don't really have different words for time and place. So time is kind of a sort of not really a thing, it's just a measure of the movement of objects in space. So we measure time through clocks ticking away, whether they're atomic clocks or normal household clocks, the movement of atoms, vibration of atoms. And primal peoples, measured time through, well, the normal ways of measuring time. When does the sun rise and set? When does it the winter solstice? When is it the summer solstice? So spiral time just means time is a kind of a pulsing movement of objects in space, and it doesn't go on indefinitely. Like the idea of it being 2024 and it goes from 0 to potentially infinity on the scale of measurement of years is fairly nonsensical to primal peoples. The only thing you measure is the rhythms, and the spirals come through that cycling back, but it's not a circle because the recognition is that there are changes over time. So, you know, the length of a year changes, the length of a day changes very, very slowly. So the spiral is a tight spiral with small differences between each cycle, but recognizing that it's multidimensional. It's not just two-dimensional.
Thank you.
Bart Robinson, you've got your hand up. I will pin you and you can ask your question.
Thank you. Thanks, Eric. And thanks, Yin. That was fascinating. And I do hope you'll be able to share the slides because I need about 4 months rather than 40 minutes to even begin to metabolize what you're talking about. My question is what, in your interpretation, were the major points in that 9,300 years that moved us from there to here?
Yeah, I mean, it's some of the stuff I mentioned. I mean, the major ones are a move from cultures that were weakly matriarchal to, most of them were weakly matriarchal to strongly patriarchal cultures. That was a huge change. Invention of money, private property, institutions, and nation states, I would say, along with that move from matriarchy to patriarchy, would be the main factors that have left us where we are. That they're all very powerful, kind of intensifying processes. So the cumulative increase of money or debt, the sort of expansionary aspects of nation states and institutions and private property, they're all kind of modes of accumulation, I guess. And patriarchy is more of a rigidity of ongoingness, not so much about accumulation, but it forces societies into very narrow confines and ruts or furrows, and it sort of deepens those in a sort of erosionary manner, those furrows to become, you know, ravines where you can't get out of very easily. So I would say those are the key factors. Yeah.
Thank you.
Shall I go ahead?
Cloud, yeah.
Sure. Hi, Yin. Thanks for that. Couple of things. I noticed some of the language from the the gesturing towards decolonial futures collective work and other sources, and I appreciate seeing that again because I've done the Facing Human Wrongs course and absorbed some of that. I'm wondering if we'll survive modernity in the sense of humans as a species, because it's a relatively short period of time. And so when you look at the expanse and the way the indigenous people have lived forever, maybe we will be able to overcome this extremely destructive and sometimes productive, but a short period of time. Your thoughts on that, I appreciate.
Yes, you'll find just firstly, you'll find a lot of references in the notes section of the slides, and many of them are to gesturing towards Decolonial Futures Collective, who are doing amazing, they're very much the global leaders in this sort of work, I would say. But there's other places as well that you can find and explore in the references section or of the notes section of the slides. I think that modern civilization is very much on the way out. I give it a few decades and then it's done for. But I'm suggesting probably a 90% chance that humans will survive. You know, there's even a lot of the climate derangement that we're experiencing now is somewhat reversible in fairly short periods of time. If we just stop destroying ecosystems, they do bounce back fairly quickly, and a lot of trees would grow back quite happily if they weren't continuously chopped down. So I think, you know, humans will survive. We've been through a few crucibles before, evidence of, you know, small numbers of humans at certain points in Africa, and that may happen again. But I think that some humans will survive and will go on to, you know, repopulate the globe at a sustainable level, as we did for most of our history. But it won't be modern civilizations that we, you know, all empires fall, and the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And this one's going to be quite the colossal quakes when it does tumble.
All right, Susan.
Hi. I mean, this was interesting and very comprehensive from a big picture perspective. I'm thinking from a little picture perspective. Like, what if we want to prepare or like start working on this now? Like, how could you do this within the confines of our current culture, in an intentional community or something like that? I mean, how would you see those seeds starting to be planted?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, a lot of the stuff that I mentioned is both very big picture and also very, very small picture, because you know, a lot of the suggestions for becoming primal or decolonizing are actually just about working on yourself, understanding your own internal modernity and what you can do to move beyond that, to grow and change and cultivate otherwiseness within yourself. So you'll see that in a lot of the slides are about yourself and also your relationships with others. How do you show up in the world? So there's a lot of work that can be done there. You can also start your own intentional community. That's what I've done, and I've just posted the website for that, where you can try and build community. Obviously, there's other ways of building community. It doesn't have to be residential, but building community, growing kinship, increasing your own inner wisdom, discernment, and capacities for making unique mistakes, really, and learning from them. These are all basically great ways to respond to the crisis, the meta crisis that we're in, and also just generally awesome ways to live anyway. So it's win-win. You can't really go wrong.
Thank you.
Any other, I don't see any hands raised up above. Is there anybody who has any questions? I'll give that a moment. Okay. Kenneth, round two. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yin, could you give some examples of short-term sanctified authority?
Have you heard of this guy called Donald Trump?
Can't avoid it.
Yeah, there you go. Anybody who's a politician who is sworn in and so forth, and they stick around for 3 or 4 years, short-term sanctified authority.
Good, thank you.
And Dan, I'll give you the pin.
Thank you. Thank you, Yin, for the wonderful talk. It seems evident that primal living offers something more balanced and expansive and dynamic and healthy, as opposed to how we're living in modern society. Yet the modern society is, as you indicated, so much more prevalent right now. Do you know, how did this transition occur? Would you estimate it was mostly accomplished through conquest?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, how it occurred at the start, why it happened is, 10, 12,000 years ago is a very interesting question. And there's different ways to tackle that question. Certainly there was a warming of the climate, and that did allow certain forms of agriculture to be viable when before they weren't. I mean, agriculture is an inferior form of nutrition, intensive agriculture. But that's why it wasn't possible before that. But when you have a warming climate, you have more energy in the system. So you can do stuff that is really not that great, but kind of works all right. if you have that space and warmth and energy to do that. So that, but it's not all about agriculture. We don't know exactly what happened to create these fairly rapid changes in social configurations and people moving from nomadic to sedentary lifestyles and all this sort of stuff. Urbanization early forms of urbanization, intense population density, and so forth. Because there is evidence that certain things change in other parts of the world too at the same time. So another theory would be more of a zeitgeist shift in the zeitgeist. Maybe if you're interested in like the ages of the earth, maybe you're into Vedic philosophy and you think that we live in the age of Kali Yuga, and so that's a change that happens across the whole planet at once and starts slowly, of course. So we saw an increase in patriarchal hierarchical forms of society in, say, the Papua New Guinean highlands 12,000 years ago. Why did that happen? It's not an influence directly from Mesopotamia. But after that point, yes, the invention of soldiers and armies and coinage very much intertwined, and that led to this early chiefdoms and fiefdoms, and people just wanted to, the concept of territory arose, people wanted to expand their territory, so they pretty much did, and then they had wars about it when other people didn't really like that very much, and a lot of primal societies were pushed into places where they still exist, which generally is mountainous regions. Something about modernity is kind of allergic to topography. They're not a huge fan of mountains. I think it's because it's hard to make roads in those places, and roads, you need roads because you need to have all these wheels and armies and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? I've got a couple maybe that I will toss out since I don't see any other questions. Actually, Claude, you had a question you wanted to know about deep listening. Would you like to go for it?
There seems to be a question from Carol.
Yeah, let Carol go first,
well.
please.
Okay. I didn't see Carol's hand until just a moment ago. So Carol, yes.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, it looks like we need a lot of therapy. I'm looking forward to the slides. It's really transforming kind of ontologically, right? How we are in the world. It all starts with there. It always does. And it's wonderful to just see it. Yeah, see it. This is it, man. And I was just thinking too, I was listening to someone and he was suggesting that writing, you were suggesting what, what led to the transformation of societies, right? And you were suggesting, matriarchy. But one person was suggesting that writing was, because of the abstraction of it, actually was very, very critical point in the transformation of how people relate to the world and everything around them, because there is that abstraction aspect, and it's a fabulous tool too, right, for the standardization and recording, and we know that our earliest records of writing are recording harvests, recording state related materials, right, for control essentially. So just thinking about that, because we love to read and write, don't we? I mean, my God, isn't it important for us? So it's like it's such a paradox. It's such a beautiful jewel of a gift, but very. So just have you ever had any thoughts about that? About the paradox of that? If it's a paradox.
Yeah. Well, basically, that's my understanding, is that writing was invented originally as a sort of tally for agricultural yields, and also to enable kind of war hosts to, money was invented to basically pay soldiers. Otherwise they wouldn't have been able to get any food because they're too busy soldiering, and most other people just did their own thing and created their own, cultivated their own food. So writing is a tricky one. It has a lot of problematic histories, and it does certain things to our brain that makes us think and inhabit certain states of consciousness. It's an abstraction. It doesn't help us keep a good memory or a good sort of We don't have those long oral sagas and tales anymore. That really helped us, our brains, I think, to grow and develop well. Well, there's evidence that the human brain has been shrinking over the last 4,000 years. And that's mostly, and that there is a correlation between intelligence and brain size within species as an average. And yeah, so it's probably because of modernity. And these are the sort of things that these sort of hierarchical, writing-based, alphabetized cultures aren't good for us. You know, they're complicated societies, but they're not very complex. And so they don't challenge us in many ways. And I think that that loss of that rich oral culture is one of the problems of writing, which, you know, was invented a long time ago, but didn't become ubiquitous until, you know, a few hundred years ago with the printing press. And now, you know, all the children are exposed to this, what is basically quite a dangerous practice at an early age. And it's not good. It's not good for us.
A dangerous practice. Imagine just saying that. That's just a what, right? And it's like, yeah, we outsource so much of our brain work, you know, and it's seen as progress. And we're doing that even more now. What with, of course, you know, computers and everything. We don't have to think anymore, right? Just let the app do it for you. The app can guide you around the world. Just listen to the app; it'll tell you where to turn. You don't have to think anymore, but even where you are spatially in the world. That's I think that's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the outsourcing does shrink our brains.
Yep.
But it's so enticing, right? We're enticed into it.
That's the thing about modernity. It is enticing. It comes back to those addictions and cravings and callings, and technology as part of that is very enticing because, you know, you think to yourself, well, you know, let's be more comfortable. Makes things more easeful. But actually, we need that discomfort. We need that pain. We don't need suffering. We don't need immiseration, but we need pain and discomfort to help us to grow and you know, having more bean bags and more iPhones and more robots. You know, the vision of the future in the 1970s was, you know, everyone was just had leisure time everywhere and robots did everything for us. But, you know, primal peoples only spent about 4 hours a day working, you know, and that working was in socializing at the same time with their kin, you know. So it wasn't like working like we do work, where we go into some open plan office and get abused by people who are meant to be our bosses who have actually no idea what life's about. That's not what work was. Yeah. I've just posted a link to the slides so people can just download them now to save anybody having to worry about getting them later.
Can I make one more comment? You know, you always hear about, oh, but we live longer, we have medicine. But a lot of the medicine is to address the ills of the world that we've created. It's just self-perpetuating. And the longer life, people are electing to die, wanting to die, because they're being kept, you know, they've been kept by pharmaceuticals and whatever. Just live longer, and the quality is shitty. Just get shunted into care homes. It's just horrible. It's just weird.
This is exactly right. Absolutely. You know, suicide is virtually unheard of in primal societies. It just didn't happen. And mental health issues were very, very much absent compared to what we have now. You know, heart disease, which is the number one killer in a lot of countries, is actually incredibly new as a disease. Like, I'm not talking about 10,000 years ago. I'm talking about 150 years ago. I mean, the guy who invented the electrocardiograph or whatever it is that measured your heart thing with those little stickers in the early 20th century was actually laughed at by people in the medical profession, because it's like, why would you ever need to worry about someone's heart? Virtually every disease that we have is created through modernity.
Yes. I thank you for saying.
Claude?
Yeah, just quickly, you went over fairly quickly on deep listening. I'm very interested in listening as a practice and as a way of life. Could you just expand a little bit on that? I'll read the slides, but if you could just give us a gist
Yeah,
of what that is,
no
please?
worries. Let's have a look at the slides anyway while we're here. So deep listening is about tuning in to the cadence, the rhyme, the timbre of silence and stillness, and also activity in life, what actually happens in the world. I find a lot of modern humans are not very good at paying attention to what's actually happening around them. And deep listening is about that. It's about yielding to mystery, metaphor, intuition, imagination. But it's just what it sounds like, you know. Do people know how to listen and hear and remember what they heard? Are they good at discerning patterns as well, not just of one instance of listening, but patterns of listening? This sort of bird call happens at this time of the morning in winter, and it doesn't happen in summer. And at sunset, there's different bird calls, and not just bird calls, but you know, my partner that I live with is grumpy on the days that she has her period. Like most people might actually know that. That's a very low level. But actually, this other husband of mine is always grumpy on a Saturday afternoon. Do I notice that? Do I actually notice those rhythms or not? You know, deep listening to everything around you. And part of what, well, there's other slides about that, but that's basically the general gist of it. And there's this 4-step process of deep listening you could use. Attend to and be present, still the internal chatter, sense into subtleties, respond with humility and curiosity, anticipate resulting ripples and responses. And at the homestead where I live and am growing a community, we talk a lot about what we call murmuration. So murmuration is that sense of something that birds do and fish do. And, you know, people ask questions like, how do the birds all know to turn left at that point? There's like hundreds of birds that are flying together. That's murmuration, and humans can murmurate too, but we need to learn deep listening to be able to do that. So we don't need to ask lots of questions, have lots of long-winded discussions, hours of coming to consensus on things. If we grow our depth of our kinship bonds with each other, we can actually sort of, it's a form of telepathy, really. Yeah. We know what someone else is feeling and thinking because we're murmurating with them. We can sense into what needs to be done here, what needs to be done there, when we need to change tack, when we need to stop talking because we've gone on for too long, change topics, do something different. This is murmuration, and we are inviting people at our homestead to learn how to murmurate with each other, because we think that primal peoples were very good at murmurating and that modern humans have forgotten how to do that.
And I see Kenneth has his hands up, but before I give the mic to Kenneth, I wanted to share just a really quick story. You know, you talked about deep listening. So I was in the nature awareness movement or studying that kind of stuff for a long time. And I met a gentleman who spent a lot of time on his land listening to bird language. And he had a land that abutted a road, and there was a big hill, and there was a robin, and it wasn't always the same robin, but if one robin died, other robins would put a nest in a tree that was right at the top of that hill by the road, because it was just a really good spot. And he spent a lot of time listening to the robins that lived there over the years. And what he learned was that if he really listened closely, he could actually tell from the way the robins were singing what kind of car was coming up the other side of that hill. And sometimes he was even able to discern the color of the vehicle. And this was all embedded in the robin's song. And yeah, it was just really fun listening to him tell that story about learning to listen, not just to other people, but learning to listen in a more general sense.
Yeah, that's a great
listening to
example.
people.
And that sort of stuff happens all the time. And those levels, those are the different realms we can inhabit when we start to become. It's like, you know, everyone sort of in modernity thinks, oh yeah, we sort of all see the world in the same way, but there's very, very deep perceptual differences, and some of those are very easy to explain. Like, you know, if I'm an architect, and I have friends who are architects, I'm not one of them. They come into my house and they just see all these things in my house that I just don't see, you know. oh, that's that and that's that. Oh, it's interesting what they did there, and that must be because of this. And I'm like, it's essentially a different realm that they're living in. They're looking at my house and they're seeing a different realm of existence. Now you multiply that by 1,000 and you get these sort of effects of these robins. You get, my partner who's very primal, very, very good at discernment and these sorts of things. Is a veterinary nurse, and she speaks dog and she speaks cat and she speaks horse. So she's actually hearing what those animals are saying through their body language in a way that most people just don't. She told me the other day, I didn't realize this. Did you know that our dog, did you notice, and I hadn't noticed this, that our dog only barks at cars coming up the driveway that she hasn't seen before? In other words, cars that she hasn't heard the noise of before. The same sort of story that you're telling. If she's heard the car before, she doesn't bark at it. If it's a new car, she barks. Yeah.
Okay, Kenneth.
Ian, would you mind giving a timeline on your shift from what I would assume you did have a public school education to what is now, what seems to be, at least relative to me, a much more primal way of interacting and thinking and being in the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very much a work in progress for me. Yeah, I was raised in modernity, but at the same time, I'm an Aboriginal man, so Indigenous person from Australia. So I've always been influenced by my ancestors and elders to feel and sense and experience the world in somewhat different ways. That's of course been alongside in parallel with modern forms of education and so forth. So I kind of had a start on that from early in life. But more recently, really, only in the last 5 years or so, I've really started to have enough of modern living, and particularly the sort of anonymous kind of lonely, separate existences of suburbia, urban life. I found that to be unbearable. So I went off looking for and living in more rural areas where people had started intentional communities, and I was experimenting, inquiring into those, and I tried one of those and realized it wasn't quite for me, and then started my own community. So it's been a lifelong journey, but also intensified in recent years. This sense of this need for kinship and community and connection, particularly with humans and more than humans, come about just because I think don't know. I just felt an increased sense of the not being nourished by modern life has increased for me. I think for most of my life I was sort of pretty trapped in the whole, oh, you need to achieve this and achieve that, and you need to work hard and rise up the ranks of whatever the career ladder of academia in my case. So it's easy to be distracted by those are forms of addictions and cravings as well. And I think I sort of came out of that a little bit. I felt like I'd arrived at a place and I didn't want to go any further with that sort of stuff. And so then it opened up more space for realizing that none of that was really very nourishing anyway, and I need to look for that nourishment somewhere else.
Thank you.
Okay. I think Yin, you and I talked about 40 minutes of presentation and then 40 minutes of Q&A. So if we hold exactly to that, we've got about 30 more, not 30, I apologize, about 3 more minutes. Yeah, I don't know exactly what your time frame is.
Well, I had planned to the half hour anyway, so
Okay,
but
okay, so we've got a little bit of time. And yeah, just thinking about what you just said about, it made me think of loneliness. And I read a book. This was a couple years ago. I struggled a lot with depression when I was in high school, my very young years. And I read this book by a man named Johann Hari. I'll put a link to this in the notes and stuff that I send out tomorrow with recording and all of that. But the book is called Lost Connections, and Johann Hari's point, thesis for the book, is that the epidemic of mental health issues that we are facing in the West is largely due to loneliness. And he did not, and when he said that, he was thinking about human to human loneliness, being lonely of other people. But as I was reading it with the background that I have, I'm thinking the human to human loneliness is just the tip of the iceberg. Because like for the last, 10-ish thousand years, we have been severing our connections to all the other beings that used to be an integral part of our day-to-day life and experience. But yeah, I think that, whomever gets through the craziness of the next 100 years, they will probably look back on all of this and realize how important that the making of kin is, not just human kin, but more than human kin or other than human kin.
And that kinship stuff is really the key, for with all life, and its loneliness is very much the high end of that problem. But yeah, and we have managed through a lot of modernity to maintain some sort of kinship, at least with other humans. But more recently, that's even gone out the window, and so I think the mental health crisis is very much due to the humans not living in the way that we are designed for. We have a certain blueprint, like an octopus has a certain way to live, mostly antisocial. Octopi are mostly antisocial. And if this society was full of octopi, we'd probably be fine. But humans are pro-social mammals, and it's just not working for us.
All right. Other questions or comments? And I should note that, and I should have said this early on, but tomorrow for me, which is already today for Yin in Australia, I will send out an email and there'll be a link to all the recording, the chat text, and then I'm kind of accumulating links and books that people are mentioning, and we'll add a bunch of other resources to that. So all of that will go out in an email tomorrow. So watch for that if you want. I'll put a link to the slides that Ian presented as well there. But yeah, any other final questions as we ease into towards the end of our period?
Thanks, Nancy.
Oh, I always have questions, so I can put another one out there if that's okay.
Go for it.
I work in the arts and ecology kind of things. I do a podcast, and I'm interested. I saw a lot of artistic practices in the well-being of indigenous peoples and primal peoples. But of course, one doesn't necessarily call it art; you call it life, right? So that's a problem with the art world, is that it's separated itself from mainstream life through to modernity. It's become a commerce and it's become this and that. But any thoughts about art, or something like art in your world?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Yes, definitely art, expression through various mediums and modes is it's foundational to primal life. And yeah, the arts in modern society is very much separated out and modularized. And I was talking to someone the other day who said one of the things that they appreciated from growing up in a fairly traditional Christian upbringing not so much the religious doctrine, but this is what they said to me, and this is something that I'd realized before, is that they felt that singing and dancing and so forth, probably more the singing, was just a normal thing to do in culture. And we do that at our homestead most mornings of the week. We have singing, spiritual singing, and totally, non-denominational sort of stuff. And they said that because in modernity, they feel that there's this sense that you only should be playing the piano or singing or dancing if you're really good at it, you're a professional at it or something. And they had that sense that sense of kind of suffocation and restriction on people's ability to express through those means because, they weren't very good at it, or they weren't good enough, or hadn't practiced very much or whatever. And so the arts becomes this elitist type of performative entertainment sort of thing, which is not what it is in primal cultures at all. At the same time, if you dig a little bit deeper, there are some scholars who say that all language, all art, and all science are a diminishment of the human condition. All language, all art, and all science are a diminishment of the human condition. And that's because in deep primal times, people were so attuned to the land, to the skies, to the seas, that they didn't need to talk very much. They were tuned with each other. They were murmurating through this kind of means of telepathy, and didn't need to talk much. They just received wisdoms from the cosmos. The plants told them what they were for, how to use them. They didn't need to do any scientific trial and error stuff. And they didn't need to paint quite striking pictures of buffaloes on cave walls because they were at one with the buffaloes. The representation of buffalo was unnecessary.
Carol, I see your hand.
Now, it strikes me when you say that, because as I was saying, we were talking about writing and all these very important arts and creations that we see as the creative arts for humans, but there's the paradox, that the danger also, as you're referring to it, in terms of it can be used to abstract and to diminish the human experience also. How paradoxical, but look, we don't even think about that. And I'm just thinking that, thinking of that buffalo on the cave wall. Yeah, it wasn't needed, but that was art for a purpose. That purpose was to initiate, to draw forth the memory, just to instigate in the mind of the viewer. Yes, I am with this. It's the idea of union with the picture, not just observing it and being entertained by it, or whatever the odd experience of viewing art is now. But it's really true. It's true. It's a true fusion, and very deep on a very deep level. Not something you just can't. And ceremonial and very sacred for that reason. Not just something.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they had their purpose, and
Very
they
much.
weren't the same purpose as someone wandering through the Louvre looking at a framed picture of a buffalo. It's not the same thing. It's a representation which is somewhat unprimal in its own way, but it's a representation that's about evoking and manifesting a being within a certain place, which is a cave, which is obviously a sacred place used for ceremonial purposes. So it makes a lot of sense. It's just there's that paradox and contradiction, which are very much embraced by primal peoples as normal contradiction and paradox. That's just life.
Okay, a few more minutes. Any final questions? Dan, I see your hand.
I just had a comment and I want to say thank you to Yin for sharing his talk tonight because particularly in election years in the US, things feel even grimmer than normal and more depressing and bleak. And just by hearing the ideas you were invoking tonight, it keeps the mind fresh and aware of what else can be, what else we have been and can be. And one thought I had is that yes, modernity has all but taken over the world, except for these few pockets, but it is very inspiring how the ideas of primal living are survived, and we can now tap into them, and that was not extinguished.
That is very good news.
Yeah.
Dan. And the other good news for people who sort of say the same thing as you, but are a little bit despairing that there's not many of those pockets.
Right.
The other good news is that our ability to inhabit primal ways of knowing, being, doing, relating, perceiving is innate. It's a birthright. And at some point, my maternal ancestors came to this continent, now called Australia, 80,000 years ago, and they had no idea what was going on. I mean, they were primal. They had a lot of skills, but they didn't know what a kangaroo was and all that sort of stuff. So people can learn this stuff from scratch as well. It's all, as a young man who was at one of my talks said after I finished talking, they said, all of this stuff, Yin, is discoverable. And I said, yeah, it is. I'm not, this is not some sort of dogma, go out and figure it out yourself. This is what I figured out, and you can discover all this. Yeah.
Any parting thoughts, Yin, before we all wrap up?
Well, thank you, everybody. It's been a very interesting, nourishing, uplifting, inspiring kind of discussion. Yeah. And it's always good to have such engagement at these sort of events. So really enjoyed and appreciated it. Thanks very much.
I'm going to stop the recording and